We are in the midst of multiple crises: climate change, biodiversity loss, social inequality, poverty, etc., etc. The typical way we think about it is government regulations, such as the regulation of price or the regulation of the quantity of the public goods, or then intergovernmental measures, such as the Convention on Biological Diversity and other global treaties. So this would be clearly the first best to regulate. But the challenge is that these regulatory measures are very hard to implement. And so this then begs the question, are we just doomed? Or is there anything else out there that would allow us to help mitigate these kinds of societal challenges? And so this is precisely where blended finance comes in. The typical way, for example, the mitigation of climate change has been funded is through public funding and philanthropic funding. But there's a huge financing gap that we are facing, and this financing gap has increased now that some governments have cut down on their development funding, on the public funding of these issues. And so this increases that financing gap even further. And so the critical question really becomes, how can we crowd in more private capital to finance innovative solutions in climate tech, renewable energy, nature-based solutions, social innovations, etc., especially in the global south, where we need the capital the most. Essentially, to explain blended finance, you blend different types of capital together. So you blend philanthropic capital together with public funding, potentially concessional public funding, to help subsidize and de-risk private capital investments. And so what are these de-risking mechanisms, for example? Well, there are several different tools that could be implemented. Some of them include, for example, the risk insurance, financial guarantees, and the provision of technical assistance, capacity building, and prototyping, etc. So all these kind of mechanisms, they help de-risk these investments and therefore help improve the risk-return profile of these investments, and hence hopefully help make them more make these more attractive for private investors to come in. In a way, it's like a form of subsidy. So to what extent does public and philanthropic funding provide subsidies to improve that risk and return profile of these investments, so that these projects become financially, commercially viable for private investors to come in? Well, that's a good question. So a large, one of the bottlenecks is, for example, a lack of education, a lack of understanding. We need way much more research to better understand what are the ideal structures of these contracts. How do you actually design public-private philanthropic contracts in a way that allow for the efficient use of capital towards the Sustainable Development Goals? We also need a much better understanding of the different types of investors. What are their preferences for risk return, but also what are their hurdles? What are their legal restrictions? So, for example, some pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, they might not be allowed to invest into non-publicly listed assets, which then prevents them from actually engaging in these blended finance deals, correct? So we need a much better understanding of the different investor types, their preferences, but also what are their hurdles that they are facing, and then obviously also a much better understanding of how to design these contracts and whether or not they are effective or not. In a sense of blended finance is not novel, it's not a new phenomena, but it's still to some extent in its infancy. It hasn't really scaled up yet. And the question is, why hasn't it scaled up? Again, there are different potential bottlenecks, and I think we need to make progress on this to really, at the end of the day, we need to mitigate the current societal challenges we are facing.